Hey, listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to the episode today. Very excited for our guest, Beth Fisher. Beth, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to talk to you about all things fundraising. Before we jump into that, I'd love it if you could share a little bit with our guests, a little bit more about your nonprofit and the role at the organization.
Sure. So I work for Mel Trotter Ministries, and our mission statement is to demonstrate the compassion of Jesus for anyone experiencing hunger and homelessness in West Michigan. So I'm located in Grand Rapids, Michigan. By title, I'm the Chief Advancement Officer. So I have a team of about 18 people. Fundraising rolls up through me, so development and then communication and call center and volunteers. And I'm sure there's more. This is why I'm gray. This is like the hardest work I've ever done in my entire life, but so well worth it. Love it.
What makes it some of the hardest work that you've done?
Oh boy. Well, prior to this, I came from the corporate world. I was in corporate sales and marketing for 25 years. Loved it. I sold software and consulting services for business process improvement. And I volunteered here at the ministry. I was teaching devotions. And so I knew of the organization. And I was really having a hard time when I would show up here every week to volunteer, and I would kind of watch how they're sort of fundraising. I'm looking at their CRM over people's shoulders. I'm like, what? Not my place, right? Until I came on staff, and I'm like, now it's my place. So like all bets are off. It makes it hard just given that, right? Like I'm a high D on the disc. I'm a 3 on the Enneagram. I'm like, let's get some stuff done. And to me, I've always sort of had this rebel sort of archetype, and I was always, from the time I can remember, little girl, I was like, this doesn't make any sense in the world. These injustices in the world don't make sense to me. How do we fix them? And, it's just hard work because it matters so much. It's, manufacturing and for profit and commerce is great, but widgets are not people, and so I just feel like the work that we do matters so much because we are talking about human beings whose lives need some help and some transformation. And so the important work of the business behind the scenes feels harder to me because the outcome is heavier to me.
Yeah. Very interesting. It resonates with me. It's kind of the inverse where I spent my first 15 years of my career in the nonprofit space, starting and building nonprofit organizations, and then started Funraise about 7 years ago, selling software to nonprofits, helping them modernize and accelerate their fundraising. And so it's somewhat of an inverse story, but I think what I love about your story is sort of what you've discovered, right? Is there's ways to optimize this organization because it's doing some of the most important work, helping homelessness in a Grand Rapids area. And it needs to be optimized so that we can make more impact. So I love sort of that enthusiasm. More nonprofits need that sort of leadership because I think there's a lot more impact could be created as a result of that. Something that you mentioned that was super interesting was your corporate background and kind of the transformation that you thought you could bring to the nonprofit because of that background. Can you maybe unpack that a little bit more? What were some of the like low-hanging fruit or some of the more obvious areas to really tackle as you got started at the organization?
I love that you called it low-hanging fruit. My team makes fun of me because I use that cliche frequently around here. I'm like, you guys, this is so obvious, right? Like, why are we not doing this? It's just it will just transform everything that we're doing if we just start here because, again, it is low-hanging fruit, as you said. So one was budget. And so I had the communication budget and the development budget handed to me. And we had a former CRM. We used to use Blackbaud, 17 years here at the mission. And I, obviously, coming into a new role, there had been previous turnover. And I said, great, how does anybody know how much revenue they're bringing in? Like, well, we don't. I go, I don't understand that. There's no way to track something that we can't see data on. This is just, again, low-hanging fruit, sort of bare bones minimum. And I knew that in order to put in a new software program, because I had sold software for 25 years, that I have to justify it financially. So I looked at the budgets and I thought, nobody's questioning this. And again, it wasn't like people here didn't understand that or didn't have the wherewithal to do it. It was more of a capacity issue, right? We were just sort of operating, as many of us do, in an understaffed manner, doing the best we can do, prioritizing. And unfortunately, like looking at these sort of fine details was not a priority. It was just like, this is fine. We have a CRM. Let's just go. I looked at it and I thought, no, why are we paying somebody in Hawaii to administer the CRM? This dude's kicking it in Hawaii. We're in the Eastern time zone. That's my first red flag. We're paying him twice as much as we paid our internal DBA. And so then there was a lot of sort of when things would go wrong, easy finger pointing, which is, well, I thought he did it and I thought your person did it. I'm like, I'm done. I don't have time for drama. I don't want to hear about this. I want results. So I immediately got rid of the third party person who was administering the system. I went to our DBA and said, this is like kind of your job. That's what the JD says. You be a DBA. And provided training and so forth. We got rid of hosting. So immediately we had a salary. gone. I got rid of the hosting situation. And then I said, and on top of that, this system is not doing what we needed to do. Let's do an investigation. So there were other credit card charges, the whole thing. So we just started to look at it. The low-hanging fruit was operationally, what are we doing here? And then it was staffing, right? And so once I said, we need workflow, we need automation, we need to work smarter, not harder, because right now, as I look around, and this is not to sound disparaging on purpose, but why are we being glorified thank you card writers? There's so much more about being in a relationship than being reactive. Let's go be proactive. Let's find the people that care about what we're doing. Let's make sure that we're marketing accordingly, that we're telling them what we do around here to make sure they care about it, right? If they don't know, how can we blame them, right? This is on us. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that, the really focusing on the storytelling aspect of an organization's mission is absolutely critical to, growing and scaling an organization. I'm curious because as someone that spent a lot of time in sales and in corporate sales, was there anything that like you borrowed from your experience as a salesperson that translated well into fundraising, like specifically in building relationships with donors or, I know you're not selling the organization's cause necessarily, but you are selling impact and getting people bought in and so forth. So just kind of curious if there's anything from your sales experience that also really translated nicely to your new role in fundraising.
I actually think all of it. I don't think any of it was wasted, right? Because again, sales is about relationship. It's about saying, this is how we can make something better. In my former years, it was a process improvement within an organization. Here it is, how can I help make the lives of donors better as we collectively help make the lives of our guests better? And so there's that reciprocity, right, in relationship. And so it is really selling the cause. It is selling something. It's basically, and I tell people when I teach sales and marketing classes, I'm like, we're always selling. I would go to college campuses here and I'm talking to kids who probably don't want to be there. I'm like, you guys, how many of you like sales? None of them raise their hand. And I said, well, but you all sell, right? They're like, none of us do. I said, well, did you just try and get a date the other night? Like, that's selling. You're right. You're trying to sell who you are and why somebody should care about you. What are you interesting? Are you like you're selling something always. And so for me, it's about how do we get the message out? Because messaging is really, it's storytelling and sales.
Absolutely. Yeah. When I started Funraise, we've raised some venture capital as a business. And I realized very quickly how my fundraising background played a pretty critical role in raising venture capital. Very different audience than donors, but it was all about telling the story of and our vision as a business, where we thought we could take the business, but more importantly, how we thought we could actually help disrupt the industry and change the industry for better through the products and the tools that we were building. And I realized that that came just so natural to me because for 15 years, all I would do would tell stories with donors. All I would do was talk about, the impact that we were making and the way that we were changing the world and so forth. And so I can see how that was such a relevant sort of experience that transcended into your organization. I'm curious, as you started fundraising, like one of the, obviously as fundraisers, we think about specific kind of seasons with campaigning, whether it's Giving Tuesday, end of year, or any other sort of, relevant season for an organization. I'm curious if there's ever been a campaign that you've developed or launched that was maybe unnerving at first or brought you out of your comfort zone. And maybe I'll share a quick story that maybe will provide more context to this question. But I remember my time at the last nonprofit was at Liberty, North Korea. We were launching our big end of year campaign, but we did something totally different than we've ever done before. It was a campaign where we were asking people instead of donating, it wasn't an explicit ask, is we had laid out this big vision of some policy we wanted to change. And what we asked for, instead of a gift, give us your signature. And we're gonna take this to Congress and we're gonna try to pass some legislation. It was one of our best fundraising campaigns ever because not only did we provide a way to get people engaged and a very tangible, practical way to get involved on the organization, very naturally, quickly after they're like, well, we want to give too, right? And so we didn't even have to really ask for it. Not all campaigns necessarily you have that ability to do that. But I was really uncomfortable going into end of year launching a campaign that wasn't explicitly asking people to give. Instead, it was more of a talent and time kind of ask than a resource ask. And I was hesitant about it, but it ended up being one of our better campaigns. And so curious if there's anything like that you've worked on in your experience at the organization.
Yeah, similar, right? So uncomfortable is strong for me because I'm like, to me, it's all very comfortable when you're trying to help somebody else's life. I'm like, yeah, we're just going to do this. How can you tell me no? How can you tell any of us no with this work? But I think in the similar vein, I started here in January of 2020. So, right, I was like thrown into the lion's den 3 months pre-COVID, et cetera. And we also, prior to that, had launched the soft phase of a capital campaign. So talk about trying to bring in regular operational dollars as well as, in tandem, a $20 million capital campaign, because we really wanted to change the way in which we serve our guests. So COVID taught us a lot about that. I mean, in hindsight, right, in retrospect, it was like a huge blessing that we were able to learn so much from COVID in terms of safety and health, et cetera, and how to really do isolation well. But our entire facility has changed the way that we service our guests, meaning we used to have a 113 bed dorm for single men who would come in experiencing homelessness. Okay, 113 people in one room. I can't even sleep with my husband who snores. I'm like, no thanks. I need my space. And think about it, right? You've got such a myriad of people in there, some experiencing addiction, some who have extreme mental illness, some who are just grumpy, some who just don't, nobody wants to be there in the first place, right? So we said, how can we make this more dignified? So through this capital campaign, we completely revamped our building. And now we've got two people in a room, two people in a room on the other side, and they're sharing a bathroom. Now, to say in terms of fundraising for that was comfortable, it was not at all, because we have to still make these asks to say, we have to keep the lights on here. So like the non-sexy asks, right? We have a $7.5 million operational budget. P.S. We also need another 20 mil over here to do some other things. But again, if you say, know your audience, know your why, it makes it a lot less uncomfortable.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm also curious. I think homelessness is such a big problem in the United States, and I've noticed, just especially during being involved in so many different causes and nonprofits around the U.S. For some reason, I feel like homelessness has this like stigma, right? Where for individuals who haven't experienced it or aren't going through it, there's this stigma of like, well, why are they on the streets? Like, why aren't they working? Why are they lazy or whatever? Like the excuse may be like, I'm not going to give them money. They're going to buy alcohol and drugs. I'm curious how you guys overcome that, because obviously that's a generalization. I can see how that could potentially impact new individuals from giving to an organization like yours. So how do you guys tell this story to help supporters understand the importance of your work? And then further, how do you show the impact? How do you help your donors understand the sustainable impact that you're making as an organization on this issue?
Thank you for that question, because you are exactly right. That is the perception and the misconception, right? Which is that everybody who's homeless, they just must be making a choice. And if they would just go out and pull themselves up by the bootstraps, get a job, problem solved. Not even close, right? That is such a small percentage of the folks whom we serve, especially in this day and age with inflation, with lack of affordable housing here in West Michigan is a real problem. And so what we're doing is more of an educational like awareness program, right? It's like, hey, I know you guys think this. I'm a big believer in like lean into the elephant in the room, just as you did, right? I go into every room I can speak about, and people will say, well, you just serve people who X, Y, Z. I'm like, that's not it at all. Let me tell you, I understand why you think that. Let me also tell you why it's so wrong. And data, right? Data backs it up. But again, going back to systems in place and the right CRMs and the right data and the right inputs that will help us then have the right outputs to do the storytelling, to do the marketing. Without that, it's kind of like people are going, well, I only see what I see and I only know what I think that I understand, none of which can be backed up. So that's how we go about it. And we really talk about all of the wraparound services, because this is going to sound derogatory, but people old school think 3 hots in a cot, right? We'll give them $2.39. They'll give them some gross mashed potatoes and put them on a cot. And again, this is all we can do, but hey, we're checking a box here. We're fulfilling our duties as human beings and as Christians. So now we're good. It's so much more. It's so much more. People are living paycheck to paycheck,
Yeah, I've heard. Yeah, I've heard. It's like a lot of people are one paycheck away from being homeless. I think the kind of piggybacking on what you just said there. I think this is why I believe marketing should be a program expense, not an overhead expense, especially on an issue like you're working on. And when I was at Liberty, North Korea, no one really knew what was happening in North Korea. Everyone thought that North Korea was our enemy state. It was the axis of evil. It was crazy dictators, nuclear weapons. Why would we ever donate $1 to a country that has been perceived this way for so long? And so we knew that in order for us to actually create, support and resources for an issue that was one of the worst human rights violations in the world, that we would have to first peel back the onion, and talk about why North Korea should not be perceived this way. And so we spent at the time over 50% of our budget for the first 2 years on just telling that story and just spreading awareness, generating awareness, changing people's hearts and minds, because we knew if we did that, then we would be able to actually make a bigger impact on the issue. And so the question for you here is it hard at your organization to generate the resources you need to continue to tell the stories and to continue to demystify these wrong perceptions? Or do you feel like you have enough resources to do that for the organization?
I feel like it's a work in progress. We have we've been in existence since 1900, Mel Trotter Ministries. So we clearly have name
Oh, wow.
recognition, right? The
Yeah.
problem is some people recognize that name from the old school way of programming around here, and that's not how we do things in 2023. And so I do feel like we have enough resources for us. I guess the thing that we continue to sort of bang our heads up against a brick wall is how do we actually say the information in so many different ways that it actually lands, right? How do we actually market to all of the audiences collectively saying the same thematic, information? Like, we don't want to confuse people, clearly, because clarity is what it's all about. But yet,
Yeah.
how do you sort of deconstruct, undo, whatever those words are, what people have had in their mind for so many years? And that's the thing, is we have an aging donor database, as many organizations do. And, they've known what they've known for giving for 30 years. My daughter, who's 25, I don't think she knows where her mailbox is at her apartment, right? She has no idea what this looks very, very different to her. And she cares, as we all know, it's so true. I'm watching it. She grew up in the faith, but she's like, Mom, I don't see what I was taught as a kid. I want to know that somebody on the streets, like what I do, if I give them $5 every month, I want to know how it helps them. So impact, impact, impact. And so we share the numbers, but for me, it's more about faces and names and stories, because people can read data. It's kind of boring at the end of the day. Let's be honest. I mean, that doesn't really wow people. It's
Yeah.
necessary to substantiate, but what sells, if you will, what people stop and go, oh my goodness, I had no idea, is when they say, wait a minute, a family lives there? You guys, if a family becomes homeless in West Michigan right now, there's no place for them to go. That answer is, you're right, there isn't. That's the wow factor. I'm
Yeah.
like, it could be your neighbors, it could be your sister, it could be your family. Think about that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, giving is such an emotional experience, for individuals and donors. And, a lot of times organizations will lead with data, like there's 100,000 homeless people living in Grand Rapids, or, hey, there's this lady named Sally and she could really use your help. That message is going to resonate with more people. It's tangible. I can understand one person. It's hard to understand, what does 100,000 people look like living in the streets, and how does my $5 actually make a difference for 100,000 people? And so I totally agree with you. Data is to substantiate the impact and to inform decisions. It's internal, right? It's for you as an organization to use to make good business decisions. But when it relates to fundraising, it's got to be about the story. It's got to be about the individual. I take that a step further even and say that there's this old conversation in the nonprofit space that the donor is the hero. I think I don't believe the donor is the hero. I believe the donor is an amazing character in this story, but the individual receiving the help, the individual overcoming their challenges, coming out of the streets, that's the true hero. They've been enabled. They've been given the opportunity to overcome their challenges. And so I think that it's so important to tell the story in a way that represents all parties in an equitable manner. But definitely agree with you that it's about the story. It's not about, the data point. That's not what gets people to actually give. Beth, you have a lot of experience in fundraising in the corporate world. Be curious if there's any advice you'd like to offer for new fundraisers coming in, whether they're coming from corporate, whether they're just getting started in their career. Any advice that you'd like to share to help them get started that would maybe help accelerate their learning curve as they start fundraising for their organization?
Yeah, I had to learn this in my early 20s too, when I was in sales. And for me, it's the biggest lesson is to network, is to get yourself in so many different groups, right? That it's sort of, you will find the crossover, you will find the intersection, but kind of sit back and feel like, well, I'm going to go in the office 8 to 5. I'm going to be in front of my CRM all day. I'm going to call this person. I'm going to write a thank you note. It's so much different than if you are in, right, grassroots. Like, get out there, really. Like, when I see our development team and they're in the office, I'm like, I don't want to see you. I love you guys. I don't want to see you right now. I want you in relationship with your donors. I want you to say, hey, I care about you. Let me tell you what I just saw. Real-time updates, huge. Because if I am somebody who is being solicited, and I am, right? We all are in some way, shape, or form. I want to know that I am unique. And the only way to let me know that you feel like I'm unique is for you uniquely to speak to me. And so I'm not really into, I know it's a necessary evil. I mean, don't get me started on direct mail. Yes, it's necessary. But I personally don't like to be one of many. I want to be one of one. And I want to know that you see
Yeah.
me and you understand my heart for giving, and you understand my connection to your organization. Because if you don't take the time to get to know me, I may not take the time to give you my money.
Yeah. No, totally. I totally agree with that. I was chuckling a little bit because I think the one to many works is more actually on like the guerrilla tactic style of fundraising. We did this really well at the first organization I was at called Invisible Children, where we would literally go to any Apple store. We would travel all around the United States to spread awareness. And we would like, where are there mass computers? We went to libraries, Apple stores, and we changed the home screen to our banner to our website. And it actually drove a ton of traffic, and we would get new support all the time. We would hear about people donating that would say, hey, like, this is so creative. I found your organization. It's so amazing. I'm going to contribute. So I'm also all about the creative kind of grassroots guerrilla style, but nothing beats, that one-to-one relationship building, especially if we're trying to beat donor churn, if we're trying to keep donors involved in organizations for the long haul, if we're trying to create lifelong donors. It's so important to build those relationships. And so thank you for that advice. I think that is super, super helpful. Beth, I know you're busy. And so wish you the best of luck in your efforts. And thank you so much for joining Nonstop Nonprofit to share your wisdom with us and our audience.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Beth.